Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 35,892 people from 160 countries and is supported by 509 organisations. It's a statement based on CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which is a UN convention, and it outlines the threats posed by gender identity ideology, and it's nearly 7,000 words long, so it's a very coherent statement on what we and the 35,892 people who've signed it would like governments, international organisations and local governments and any organisations to do in order to defend women's sex-based rights. We have over 100 volunteer activists and country contacts engaged in defending women's rights and promoting the declaration. Do join us as a volunteer if you can. But a couple of bits of news. The British Library, which is a influential repository of information, has just this week asked to archive our website, which is the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights website, which has lots of information and links to our YouTube channel and YouTube videos and statements and lots of news, which we have agreed to do. So soon we will be accessible and hopefully for a long time, forever perhaps, on the British Library web archive, which is an achievement because it has to be a sort of significant and sensible website. So it's a massive achievement that we have created this important resource and we're recognised by the British Library. Very good. Another piece of news is from Christina Ellenson, who is the WDI contact in Norway. She's reported Sandra Mohn to the police for hate speech and threats over his video game, Turfenstein. She cited hate speech on the basis of sex and political beliefs. The police have dismissed the case, citing lack of resources to conduct an investigation. And she has appealed and still not heard anything back. She's been advised to take the case further, as it would show that Norway has discriminatory hate speech law and practice, as the law excludes sex as a protected characteristic. This is the same law that's had the police place Christina Ellenson under investigation for 8 months over gender identity. There is an email of the district attorney in Oslo, Lars Erik Alfheim, that you could email, and there's information about that program, which I will put in the chat in a few minutes. So if you could email the district attorney and say that they should investigate hate speech, this Turfenstein, which is incredibly violent, and cites WDI, Women's Declaration International, as something that should be attacked, which is terrible. Okay, today I'm really pleased that our speakers are Denise Fahmy from the UK. She's going to talk about concerns she raised with the Arts Council, England Chiefs, about intolerance in the arts, and the Arts Council's role. And the title of her speech is Can Women Do Art? Then we're going to hear from Lorraine Nowlin, who is from WDI USA Black Women's Caucus. She's going to discuss the motivations process and response to the Black Women's Caucus statement against gender ideology, and a little bit about the Black Women's Caucus itself. Then we're going to hear from Sarah Freeman from the UK, claiming back the Women's Institute for Women, and about how she's gone from the be kind position to challenging the Women's Institute, created a media storm, and future actions against the WI. Then we're going to hear in Spanish from Zuleika Valentin from Puerto Rico, and that's going to be about the situation in Puerto Rico and how the Puerto Rican Women's Rights Office is not adequately challenging or defending women's sex-based rights. And finally, we'll hear from Delith Rennie, who is a coordinator of North Yorkshire Women's Rights Network and a member of Sports Special Interest Group. She's going to talk about Parkrun's capitulation to gender identity ideology. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Denise Fahmy. She's an ex-employee of Arts Council England, having served for 15 years as a specialist in visual arts in the north of England.
My title is How Has the Arts Become So Intolerant? The Arts Council of England provides funding for arts organisations, individuals and anybody that wants to get involved in the arts. And it's funded through government taxes and also through the National Lottery. What I'm going to do is just talk through what happened to me a little bit, but then I want to broaden out this discussion. I've put together a series of thoughts. You know, it's not a thesis. I'm not an academic, and I'd love to do deeper research on this, really. So just have a listen to my thoughts on this subject. And also, just to say in advance, my presentation contains lots of dodgy screenshots. So please forgive me for that. So I worked at Arts Council England for 15 years. And recently, my employment tribunal was heard, and I presented 4 claims of harassment and victimisation. I'm waiting to find out what the outcome is, and I'm also fundraising for legal costs. But how did it actually come to this? Because I was a loyal, well-liked middle manager. I worked for a progressive and healthy funder of the arts. I loved the arts. I shared the values of my employer for over 10 years, and that began to gradually ebb away. By April 2022, I found myself under attack, both externally by people in the arts and also particularly by my colleagues. And I'd already tried to alert my organisation, I'd already tried to alert the Arts Council to the risk of gender ideology spreading in the arts and in our own organisation. So I'll use my story as a starting point. I think my story illustrates changes in the arts and why it's become such an intolerant battlefield. And that's due to the spread of gender ideology. Right now, first of all, just to tell you a little bit about the Arts Council, it distributes around 500 million to up to 1 billion of taxpayers and lottery players' money annually. It's generally more in around 500 million, 600 million. Goes to community groups, and it also goes to artists and also big organisations like the Royal Opera House in London, South Bank Centre, the Baltic in Newcastle. Now, like every public sector body, it's governed by the Equality Act, and it has a duty to deliver the public sector equality duty, which is broadly 3 duties: to eliminate discrimination, harassment and victimisation, to advance equality of opportunity between people, and to foster good relations between people. It's my view that many public bodies have lost sight not only of these duties, but their obligation to deliver that as a purpose, as part of their duties. They've interpreted the duties to prioritise particular identities rather than ensuring all are treated fairly and have equal access to services. So this discussion is not just about this one well-intentioned but captured organisation in the arts. It's about general service delivery in the arts. So this is kind of where my story starts. In April 2022, an organisation called LGB Alliance was awarded £9,400 from the London Community Foundation to make a film about the lives of gay men in the UK. This funding was from an Arts Council fund called Let's Create Jubilee Fund, and the actual money is derived from the National Lottery, but it was distributed through a community foundation. As soon as this grant was made, here's just the general abuse that gets targeted whenever LGB Alliance I don't think I did say, did I say LGBT Alliance? It was LGB Alliance gets the grant. And the abuse was also directed at the Arts Council for funding the LGB Alliance. just this endless discussion about whether it's a hate group. And we know the context of this is that there is currently a charity tribunal appeal being heard against LGB Alliance. And so this is the context around this award. Some more comments targeting the grant officer at at London Community Foundation. She made it probably with a number of others, the grant decision. And she was even targeted because she was known to have signed the Women's Declaration. And you can see that in one of those tweets. So abuse from all sides because one organisation gets a grant of less than £10,000 to make a film about gay men. So what ended up happening was that eventually this grant was suspended. But before that happened, one of our directors at the Arts Council decided to hold an all-staff meeting in which he invited 700 members of staff to that meeting. About 400 attended. And he gave the opinion that the LGB Alliance are anti-trans and are divisive and shouldn't be funded by the Arts Council. So that is a very partial statement to make within a staff setting, and I would argue that 400 people is pretty much a public setting. The tone of that conversation that meeting was very unpleasant. I argued that at that meeting that the LGB Alliance were not anti-trans, and he was mistaken to say that. And a number of staff members took offence at me saying that. And one staff member went on to make it known that he thought the LGB Alliance were the equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan, even in a message that he left for all staff to read. I think this was also a message from that meeting from another member of staff. So I asked, a lot of the conversation was going on in the chat at this meeting. It may seem odd to be discussing one meeting in these terms, but it was a really very extraordinary meeting. Having been there for 15 years, I'd never been to a meeting which was so hostile and really ugly. And I'd certainly never heard a member of staff be partisan about an applicant organisation or say that an applicant can't apply for funding. That was a long way from what I deemed to be meeting the public sector equality duty. So here's a question that I raised, which was, how are gender critical views protected at the Arts Council? And the Arts Council doesn't have an obligation to protect people's views. It just has an obligation to protect the welfare of its employees. As we know, that isn't the law. Beliefs are protected in law, and being gender critical is protected. So it was a mistake, really, not for the chair of that meeting not to step in and say, of course, we protect people's right to have gender critical views in the arts and in our organisation. So anyway, after this meeting, one way or another, the grant to LGB Alliance was withdrawn. But this didn't stop the turmoil in my organisation that was taking place. And what ended up happening next was about less than 4 weeks later, a petition was circulated to all 700 staff by a member of staff who'd been very critical of me at that earlier meeting. And it asked for people to sign a petition against people that were gender critical and wanting to make a collective grievance against people. And then they also asked people to make comments. And so these were some of the comments that people made, that that hatred of others should not be tolerated. And without irony, this is said that this cancer needs to be removed from our organisation, that fans and supporters of LGB Alliance, are neo-Nazis, homophobes, Islamophobes. Really dreadful stuff that should not be circulated on my organisation's intranet, as it was for 26 hours before it was finally taken down. So that is basically the subject of my tribunal, and as I say, I'm awaiting the hearing, and you can read all about it on tribunal tweets if you want to find out what actually happened at the hearing, which was very enlightening. But the point I want to make is that I was a member of staff in an office. We had an operating trade union. I had a regular salary. I'm not typical of somebody working in the arts. We also had policies. We had a grievance policy. We had disciplinary policies. Again, this isn't typical of practicing in the arts, that you have that level of protection, and yet still I experienced this level of abuse. So what's it like actually working in the arts, not at a bureaucratic funding agency, but out in the sector, making work, presenting work in theatres, presenting work in galleries, working with communities? What's it actually like? Now, the arts workforce is young and it's highly educated. The sector is very fragmented. So there isn't, by that I mean there isn't a clear career path. There isn't a clear way to progress your career. It's not even easy to get into the arts, really, and to make a living from it is very difficult. So most people working in the arts are freelance, they're on low income, and reputation is very highly prized in the arts, because it's reputation that gets you the next commission, gets you the next working relationship. So there are no real trade unions in the UK. There is the Musicians' Union, but the majority of people working in the arts are non-unionised anyway. And then, of course, the main focus of your work is the audience, and the audience is your bread and butter. So you want to make sure that you can keep people coming to see your work, that you still have traction with audiences. And the arts as well sees itself as a moral entity, sees itself as the kind of conscience of a culture. And Sonia Soda said many organisations, because they have the sense of being moral organisations, they actually have the luxury, this is Sonia's terms, the luxury of childishly dividing the world into goodies and baddies. And Peter Daly talks about the arts, talks about public sector organisations, but this can be applied to the arts as being moral organisations, so that, in his words, allegations of discrimination against moral communities, regardless of the weight and cogencies of these allegations, these present an existential risk to moral communities. So they're particularly vehement, those organisations, when they react against allegations of discrimination or victimisation. So this sense of a moral culture, again with poorly paid freelance workers, really is a perfect environment for intolerance to flourish. It encourages groups, niches, gangs, staff groups. And actually the push for diversity within that sector has also led to harassment, and women are generally the target of that harassment. We can just see a few of the many artists that have been attacked and are highly likely to be attacked. And this is because everything about working in the arts is about being in the public realm. Your career is public. You're not, as I was, in an office making grant decisions. You're actually out in the public, demanding recognition and commissioning of your work. And that means that from 18 to 80 and beyond, you are operating in a public realm. And so you're very susceptible to attack. And this has increasingly happened. And of course, it happened in the 50s with McCarthyism, when the focus of attacks was on the media, was on broadcasting, was in the arts. We're seeing exactly the same happening again now. Just some of the statements that people have said about being in that public space and having that attack made on your integrity, your income, your reputation. in either whether that's in a very public realm or whether that's in a studio group, being brought down for no reason, really, it's just pure harassment, is a life-changing experience. And for me too, it has been, actually. And I do want to reiterate as well the effect on income, because once your reputation as attacked like this, you are dependent on the arts sector to continue to support you and provide an income, and that will just fall away very quickly. I'm going to take a little tangent and talk about why I think this has happened. One of the things that I've been highlighting is what has happened to data collection. Now, this is the data collection at the Arts Council now. It won't be, I'm sure other organisations can show very similar data collection. So this data is now the same for staff, I believe, I'd have to check that, but audiences and for workforce. So if you go to see a play and you're asked whether you liked it or not, you'll be also asked about your demographic, and this is the demographic you'll be asked. And you can see that this is a long way from the census that we had in the UK a year ago, which was basically just sex, male and female, and do you live in a different gender, i.e. gender reassignment. This has brought in a whole set of ideas in which gender identity exists and is different to your sex. Now, that is a very political position for a funder to take, and it means that every organisation that receives its public funding also has to take that political position, because it has to report on those categories for its workforce and for its audiences. And I suggest that that political position, which doesn't reflect the Equality Act, is part of a harassing environment that has grown up in the arts, because it politicises people away from the law. And you can see here this is from one of the policies at the Arts Council. It won't be very different to many other organisations, but you can see how the concept of gender identity, supported by Stonewall, has become embedded into harassment policies. So it doesn't say harassment on grounds of gender identity. It says harassment on grounds of gender reassignment, which is the law. It says harassment on grounds of gender identity. So again, we're moving away from the law, and how those policies start to affect not only internal, but as a grant maker, how they will affect external. But you can start to see what has happened. So this is the workforce. The top box is the workforce in the arts over 3 years. And you can see that the people saying that they don't have a gender is gradually increasing year on year, and women are falling back. Now, we'll see whether that trend continues. But you can see also in the one below, if you look at Baltic flour mills, 47% of people that work at the Baltic, which is a gallery in Newcastle, prefer not to tell you their gender. And it was the same the previous year. It's gone up. So now it's 20%. So you can see that there's a particular culture in some organisations is starting to emerge in which sex doesn't exist. It's discouraged to be able to identify your own sex. And the Arts Council is contributing to that. I'm sure the Arts Council is not alone, but other funders, public sector generally, when it's using that kind of data, is encouraging that. And so those places become cultures of activism. Those venues are becoming activist cultures. So we start getting instances like Joan Smith illustrated, the lyric theatre, gender-neutral toilets. What woman in their right mind would want to go into that toilet in an interval at the theatre? I certainly wouldn't. We start getting initiatives like Manchester theatres have signed up to cast trans and non-binary actors in trans roles. How does that affect theatre production? Women of the World, that great initiative set up by Jude Kelly. It's not for women of the world, it's for people that identify as women as well as women. We fund projects like Claire Bowler, who did a live performance when she had her breasts removed, cutting her hair off so that the audience could celebrate that. You know, we put calls out for boards, particularly focused around trans identities. We celebrate things like this project Stripped, which was about sex positive sex work. We give it a lottery grant to support that in London, which is very difficult to get funding for. And then we support venues which, like this one in York, which used a sort of romanticist painting to talk about trans euphoria when St. Agatha had her breasts removed when she was tortured. So it's rewriting history, it's queering the audience. So this is a project which is a drag party for families and kids. And you can put there the amount of money it's had. But what I want to just say here, that it would be easy to say, and I think it's unevidenced to say that drag artists working with children has an ulterior sexual motive. I think that's very easy to say, and I don't think that's evidence. And obviously I do agree there's a safeguarding risk. But the point I want to make is that this normally would be a commercial venture, but because it can get lottery funding, if it engages with particular groups, it's actually the funders are encouraging this funding model for work that really is just adult content.
We're now going to hear from Lorraine Nowlin. She's part of WDI Black Women's Caucus and is going to discuss the motivations, process and the response to the Black Women's Caucus statement against gender identity ideology and a little bit about Black Women's Caucus. So thank you so much, Lorraine, and over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, women. I am Lorraine Nowlin, the coordinator of Women's Declaration International USA's Black Women's Caucus. Myself, Dana, who was once a guest on Feminist Question Time, and Kristen decided that enough was enough. We were tired of proponents of gender identity ideology, many of whom are white privileged men, distorting the experience of Black women in America for their own selfish gain. A quote from our statement: gender ideologues employ the forced teaming tactic against Black women in order to shame us into being work mules for their campaign of male sexual privileges that they call transgender rights. While these efforts are masked as progressive and inclusive concepts, gender identity ideology is actually intrusive and harmful to women, and uniquely so to Black women. We were frustrated that this men's right movement would dare try to make Black women the face of invading women's boundaries, and that means invading our own boundaries. While, as you can see from these images, while there are Black women that support this movement and foolishly put their safety at risk to support it, I can't help but wonder how being constantly bombarded with this kind of imagery impacts Black women who are on the right side of history. And when I say the right side of history, I mean those that reject this dangerous ideology. We've got forced teaming from the left and the perpetuation of these images of Black women by the right. There are plenty of violent white men who claim to be women that harm women in our movement and threaten to harm women in our movement. But these images, especially the second image, are widely shared. That is not to downplay the foolish acts of these women, which includes taking part in disrupting another woman's right to free speech. It is simply to show one reason why we had to release a statement. Not only that, it is no secret to Black America, and probably now to white America, that there is very little outrage when Black women are victims of violence, whether by the men in our own communities or outside of it. So knowing that, we have to really count the cost. Is it really worth risking the wrath of law enforcement so that men can have access to women's vulnerable spaces? That may not be these women's intentions, but that's exactly what they're doing. If we must take risks, we should do it for ourselves, for causes that will actually improve our lives. I once heard a Black woman say that she's determined to protect trans women. I'm going to be brutally honest and say that every statistic on file shows that Black women can barely protect themselves, whether it's maternal mortality, police brutality, adverse health outcomes, sex trafficking. We need protection. We need saving. It is laughable and tragic to think that we can save others. Again, I'm mentioning all of this to illustrate the frustrations that led to our statement. Also, you know that our movement is branded as Nazis, racist, right-wingers, and every asinine rant the opponents can muster up while being willfully obtuse to the fact that some of us are Black, Asian, Jewish, and Latina. So Dana, Christian, and I met on Friday evenings via Zoom and worked hard on our statement. Our purpose was simply to write from the heart about why we feel this movement is harmful to us uniquely. We expected that some would read it, but we never imagined it would get the massive amount of attention it did. Well, I was especially shocked to discover that J.K. Rowling not only read it, but retweeted our statement. I know I will never get the opportunity to tell you this in person, J.K. Rowling, but thank you for sharing our statement with your followers. But of course, our statement hurt a few feelings. Some of the responses left me in stitches. There were actually people who thought that the WDI USA Board of Directors, of which I'm a member, were pretending to be a Black Women's Caucus. We were these imaginary Black women created via the imagination of white feminists so that people won't call us Nazis. Yes, I'm actually tweeted that. Then there were the few tragic but not so unexpected responses from Black women, just a few though. To them, our statement was mean, bigoted, and hurtful. In other words, some Black women feel that advocating for Black women solely or at all is hateful and wrong. Think about that. What they are essentially saying is that either we put on our capes for men or we perish. A couple of women accused us of focusing on gender ideology instead of, quote, real issues like police violence or the experiences of Black women in medical care, et cetera. While I do agree that those are important issues, I find it interesting that I've never heard those complaining about us tell those pushing gender identity ideology that Black maternal health is more important than their pronouns. They don't say that closing the educational racial achievement gap is more important than living out your AGP fetish, or that fairness in policing is more important than a man wanting to use the women's bathroom. It is only a problem when women prioritize themselves over everyone else. Until they have those conversations, you really can't have a conversation with us. So they really don't have a leg to stand on. But now with the middle picture, in case some of my international sisters are unaware, the phrase "we said what we said" or "I said what I said" is a popular phrase, mostly among Black Americans, meaning get over it, or I stand by what I said, something like I'm doubling down on a statement. But back to the point, however, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Women and men of all races let the Black Women's Caucus know that our statement was so needed and appreciated. I cannot tell you how many times a Black woman posted or tweeted, "Finally, finally." You might be wondering why a Black Women's Caucus is needed. Well, racism is a reality for Black women in the United States and throughout the world. It may manifest itself differently depending on where we live or what country we live in, but it's a reality nonetheless. Sometimes racism is intertwined with sexism, impacting Black women specifically. A Black organization might have a women's caucus in the same manner that an all-women's organization might have a Black women's caucus. The issue is this: some of our concerns will not apply to the broader women's movement, but at the same time, we are not going to ignore our specific issues because others don't want to acknowledge racism or are uncomfortable talking about it. It is imperative that we win this battle. We are not going to win with just one strategy. Has any war ever been won with a singular strategy or method? If a Black Women's Caucus statement will help win some battles, we will keep fighting. If a middle-class white woman will make gains in another area, definitely keep going. A Black woman might be able to make a statement that might cause a white woman to be called a racist. That's true. Others might listen to a white woman, but dismiss a Black woman saying the same thing. In other words, we are all branches of a tree called woman. Let's not waste time on why a caucus exists and instead just fight to win. Gender identity ideology erases the unique experiences of women and reinforces the harmful stereotypes of femininity and masculinity. It is also incompatible with the fight for women's rights because it allows men access to spaces and activities designated for women, such as bathrooms, sports teams, and housing. It has been reported that 1 in 4 Black girls are sexually assaulted before the age of 18, 1 in 4. 35% of Black women report experiencing physical sexual violence. Policies that allow men unfettered access to female designated facilities puts Black women and girls, a demographic disproportionately impacted by male violence, at an even higher risk. Black women are 2.5 times more likely to be murdered by men than white women. And this is why the fight against gender ideology is pertinent for Black women. We are the demographic most in need of protection from male violence. There's a saying within Southern Black culture, when white people get a cold, Black people get pneumonia. What that means is that every threat or problem facing the country, Black America gets it worse. Make no mistake, male hatred and violence impacts all women, women of all races, but due to the position of Black women, we're facing more brutality. That is not an oppression Olympics. It is a painful reality. I wish that all women were equally and completely safe and free. Black women have spent decades undoing the trauma of colorism, hair texturism, and featureism. We can't then turn around and embrace a movement that encourages self-hate and perpetuates the same standards of femininity that were often used against Black women and girls. No matter the reason a woman or a man wants to live as the opposite sex, it is not possible for the belief that we can be born in the wrong body to coexist with accepting our dark skin, hair texture, and facial features. They contradict each other and can't be reconciled. We live in a world where skin lightening is a more than $8 billion industry. That annual revenue is expected to increase. I even saw one that said it'll be $27 billion by 2030. And what I'm saying is the powers that be are getting richer and richer off of you hating yourself, whether it's hating your body, feeling you're born in the wrong body, or the skin you're in. This was the first, but won't be the last time you hear from WDI USA Black Women's Caucus. Gender identity ideology is not about civil rights or self-acceptance. At its core, it is self-rejection, and it will do nothing but confuse and hinder civil rights for everybody. Thank you for having me.
We're going to move on then, and you could, if you've got questions, or I've put the link to the statement in the chat, so you can look at it there, but you could put questions for Lorraine. We're now going to go to Sarah Freeman. She's from the UK, and she had a Damascene, like Road to Damascus moment last year, and realised that the Women's Institute, which is one of the largest women's groups in the UK, is completely captured by gender ideology. She's now challenging the Board of Trustees to claim back the Women's Institute for women. And so welcome, Sarah, and over to you.
I attended my first Feminist Question Time in January this year, and to say the whole thing is inspiring is an understatement. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Women's Institute and my experiences, and then sort of what's happened. For those of you that don't know about the WI, it's the largest women's organisation in the UK, and it has 180,000 members. It promotes itself as a campaigning organisation and uses words such as sisterhood on its website. According to the Constitution, membership is open to women who have reached the age of majority. It has 3 tiers. Local WIs are largely independent and organise activities for members. According to the WI, there are approximately 7,000 local branches. There are 69 federations at roughly county level, and they act as a conduit between local and national, and organise larger annual meetings and run more activities. At the top is the National Federation of Women's Institutes, where a Board of Trustees oversees the running, produces policies and runs national campaigns. Every year, members can submit resolutions, and these are scrutinised. 3 or 4 are selected to be voted on by members. When the final resolution is selected, there is another vote at the annual meeting. If it is approved by members, it is then taken up by national to campaign on, and this is a really slick and efficient process. Previous campaigns have included single-sex hospital wards, equal pay for equal work, and sports for a healthy population, as well as some of the others you can see on the screen. So there are 3 ways you can join the WI. You can join as a full member, which gives you voting rights and access to meetings, or as a supporter, and there are 2 supporter options. Neither gives you access to meetings or voting rights. And there are 3 types of different WIs. So you can go in person, you can join a virtual one, and there are also some linked to other organisations, so specifically prisons and hospices, and prisons is an interesting one. The UK arm of the WI was formed in 1915, and it was to help the war effort in producing food. The WI morphed after the First World War to encourage women to take a larger share and interest in life and work of the community. And many of the early leaders were part of the suffrage movement, and to a certain extent, it was the rural counterpart of it. It wasn't until 1928 women were given suffrage on the same terms of men in the UK. In its own way, it can be quite radical. It encouraged women to join an organisation that gave them a training ground to partake in public life. And whilst it's not meant to be overtly political, it encourages members to be involved with their local community and campaign on the things that matter to them. So back to me. In 2013, I joined the WI, and by 2015, I ended up on the committee. And about this time, a new policy was released from National about transgender members. Until then, there were personal questions that committee members had to ask, and the new policy said no more questions, and we'll just let these people in. And at the time, I didn't really think too much about it. And things just carried on until 2020, when the pandemic forced everyone to stay at home. We had to pivot as a local WI and went from in-person meetings to everything online. Amongst all of this, National instigated a change in women's institution constitutions to allow for online meetings. And the change in constitutions required a 2/3 vote from all members, and comprehensive briefings were sent out and the vote went through. So you might be asking, well, what about that? So we've got historical links to the suffrage movement. And generally speaking, I'd say it's feminist light, and it has a long campaigning history. It is very, very well organised when it comes to consulting members and finding out what they want to do. So in 2021, a new inclusion, diversity and equality policy was launched, and I gave it lip service, and looking back, that was a huge mistake. But throughout 2021 and 2022, my unease with transgender ideology grew. And then one weekend in 2022, I wake up. I ended down a rabbit hole of Helen Joyce videos, Rosie Kay, Philia, and all sorts on YouTube. And I ordered some books. I ordered Trans by Helen Joyce, Material Girls by Kathleen Stock, I read them really quickly, and I also read Defending Women's Spaces by Karen Ingala-Smith. My attention then turned to the WI, which had been increasingly promoting membership to trans-identified men and celebrating it. In December 2022, I wrote in a male friend, and you can see on the screen the email, some of the email chain that we sent when he pretended that he wanted to join. I emailed National, and apologies for the language on that we've used on this, and asked about the membership criteria changing. So I've changed my language now, I don't use this, but at the time this is what I was using. When did the membership criteria change from women only to inclusive of trans women after asking embarrassing questions to accepting anyone who states they are a woman? And was the membership consulted on this? And I received a non-committal answer. So I went back and asked specifically, was the membership consulted about the changes to allow trans women to join? And when did the policy change specifically from asking the questions to not? And they'd sent an answer. And from that, I had my eureka moment. So the NFWI Board of Trustees had created a policy that was and is in direct conflict with the Constitution. And by sleight of hand, they've allowed men to join the WI. It's worse than that, though, because the 2021 policy stated it relied on the exemptions contained in the Equality Act 2010, and it was written so the layperson wouldn't realise that those with protected characteristics of gender assignment could be legally excluded. I was really, really angry and completely obsessed, and I spent a few weeks writing a letter, and it requested three things: a moratorium on new trans members, a proper debate about what it means for the WI to accept transgender members, and a vote on it, and that would in effect change the Constitution. And it was given to one of my WI friends. She edited it and proofread it and tweaked it to a slightly less angry version. So I pointed out that legally National could exclude trans members and that the policy conflicted with the Constitution, and it also undermined campaigns already previously mentioned. The WI is a democratic organisation, and whilst I may not want trans-identified males to be members, it's up to the whole organisation to decide this. And I foresaw a debate and a vote similar as to that of the 2020 constitutional change, which they did when we were all in lockdown. So I sent my letter on the 7th of February, and in it I said I would wait until June, as I'd given them a huge list of resources, including some books, and I hoped the Board of Trustees would take the time to read and listen to some of these. And I also included the adult human female film and lots of podcasts, so yes, there was a lot in there. And I also put in tangential information, such as the 1990s satanic panic phenomena, to give them a bit of context. In March, for International Women's Day, they hosted an End Violence Against Women seminar in London, followed by the attendance at the Million Women Rise March. I registered as an attendee and looked forward to going on the 4th of March. A couple of close WI friends knew about my letter, and on the trip to London, one of my friends messaged me to say that Annalise Dodds, who is the chair of the Labour Party and the Shadow Women and Equalities Minister, was going to give the keynote speech. And I knew I had to say something. So Ms. Dodds gave her speech, and in the Q&As, I put my hand up and asked, how can we trust Labour when Keir Starmer can't define what a woman is? And you could have heard a pin drop. Then quickly, the chair of the National Federation of Women's Institutes shut the question down, saying it wasn't relevant. And I was really, really in some surprise. Annalise Dodds gave a really weak answer, but at least she gave an answer, but that wasn't really very good. So this proved to me two things. National was captured and wasn't, as I previously thought, misguided. I like to look for the good in people, but I think now's not the time. And they really didn't want to be questioned. One of the attendees shouted that the WI had been trans-inclusive since the 1970s. I've seen that repeated quite a few times now. And there was a round of applause for that. And when I shouted out, we were oppressed because of our sex, that didn't get a round of applause. But the lady that was sat next to me said, well done at the end. And that made me realise that whilst people were very pro it in public, the people who are fighting against it are generally quite quiet. So then during the afternoon, I went on the march and I saw members of the Labour Women's Declaration, and I had a chat with them. And I explained what had happened with Annalise Dodds. And the first thing they said was, were you shut down? And And I'd seen this happen to high profile women, but I hadn't really put two and two together. And I realised that that's exactly what had happened to me. Then I realised the biggest women's organisation in the UK is completely complicit in promoting a men's rights organisation. After this incident, I contacted Jo and asked if I could use the declaration and create a Women's Institute declaration. I thought this would be a good idea, as it would link me to a bigger movement. And at the time, it was mainly just me. Although I knew there'd be other members, I just had to kind of try and find them. But I wanted to make it look like it was more than one person. And I also hardened my stance. And I've subsequently shifted my position. So my initial position was to let them stay in if they're already members, but now I wouldn't let them stay in. I also wrote another letter directly to the National Chair explaining that self-ID policies, such as the WI has, fail women, and I gave a variety of examples. On the 15th of March, I received a reply from my initial letter, and it was a complete rejection. They didn't address any of the points, and I was told when I asked that the response was not to be made public. Then my friend and I, who had helped me with the letter, had a day out, and we discussed what to do next. And she said maybe the best thing to do is to directly challenge the EDI policy. The letter about the Women's March was subsequently sent, and I didn't really expect a response because I don't know how you could have responded to the points I put in it. I also wanted to create a petition to get the word out and try and gather support. And whilst I didn't have any evidence, I knew I wasn't a lone voice, and others must have approached National about this, and they were doing a much better job at silencing women than I had realised. And then by the 29th of March, I had a bit of a whirlwind of activity. I created a petition stating a moratorium, debate and vote, a Twitter handle, a website and a Mumsnet account. And I started tweeting and posting on Mumsnet about the petition. And it gained a little bit of interest, but overall I was finding it hard to gain traction, and that's what I had expected. Another friend of mine had told me that this thing gets picked up in the Daily Mail, and we'd laughed about it, but I said, oh, it's quite niche. I doubt it very much. And then on the 16th of April, I checked, and there were about 380 signatures on the petition, and I had less than 100 followers on Twitter. I was quite pleased, but wanted to concentrate on taking apart the EDI policy. Then on the 17th of March, the Women's Rights Network published the When We Are at Our Most Vulnerable report covering sexual assaults in UK hospitals. It's really shocking reading, and I knew that in 1979, the WI had campaigned for single-sex hospital wards. I wrote my tweet and I went to work, and I don't have social media on my phone, and I was surprised when I had a text message saying that my post this morning has 403 likes. And when I got home, there were hundreds of likes, retweets, comments, and quite a big pile-on for the WI. There were emails from the Daily Mail, LBC and other media outlets, and what I really wanted, which was the other disgruntled WI members, saying they had been shut down and ignored. I answered the emails and contacted the Board of Trustees to inform them that they were going to be in the Daily Mail. The entire week was a bit of a blur. William Hague, who's an ex-leader of the Conservative Party, if you're not in the UK, told us to get over it. Joe Bartosh wrote a hilarious article in Spiked magazine calling the WI Willy inclusive, and the CEO doubled down and put a response in the Guardian newspaper reinforcing that trans women are women mantra and stating that the WI is open to dialogue. On Friday, the 21st of April, I had a response from the complaint about being silenced, and it was very short and said it was not my intention to stifle discussion. I thought it was quite derisory, but always made me, but I was quite surprised even to get one. So the furore lasted about a week, and from the outside, it might look as though I've only just managed to create a storm in a teacup. But what I really wanted to achieve was finding other women in the WI who disagree with this policy, and I have, and it's been really helpful. And there's not a huge amount of us, but the debate has largely been confined to Twitter, and many WI members are not on social media, and they're generally older women. They can be hard to reach, but also really easy to ignore. I've shone a light on the WI's underhand policies and that it is captured at national level. I think I forced them to change the EDI policy for the worse, as on the 19th of April, the CEO said it wouldn't be changed, and then it was later reissued, doubling down on the inclusion of trans-identified males and removing the references to same-sex exemptions contained in the Equality Act. It did remove the signature sheet, which I specifically criticised, and I've gathered nearly 3,000 signatures on the petition. The other things I've realised is that the trans activists in the WI are as committed as those outside, and have come out with smears about us on the unofficial WI Facebook group. I've now got access to that, and I didn't at the time. I believe this is a small minority, and most members are open to discussion. So this week, I finally managed to send out the EDI policy critique, and this will be live on the website later this month. I sent a letter directly to Melissa Green, the CEO, with multiple signatories, asking very direct questions about her Guardian article. And again, that will be published later this month. And I've had an interim reply from both saying that the WI is open to dialogue, which I don't believe it is. The response will guide my future actions. I'm not expecting the response to be positive, because if you follow me on Twitter, this morning I posted that trans-identified male Petra has been included on the membership committee as a member representative. So therefore I'm intending to write a formal complaint to the Charities Commission. And I know that at least 2 people have written to the Human Rights Commission about this, Equalities and Human Rights Commission, about the WI. So hopefully we will force either the WI to stop taking the trans-identified males and including them, or we'll hold a membership vote. So thank you for everyone on here as well. Thank you for all the previous speakers. I've only just recently realised there's been a full frontal assault on women's rights, and just if you're the same, you can make a difference. So thank you.
Now we're going to hear from Zuleika Valentin from Puerto Rico. She was born and raised in Puerto Rico and now living in Florida. She completed a master's in sexual education on the island. During her graduate studies, she questioned the gender perspective or gender ideology which was being promoted, whether it was a healthy sexual education approach. As she became more aware of how the USA was using gender identity ideology to infringe upon our sex-based rights, she became a WDI USA volunteer.
Buenos días a todas. Nuevamente agradezco a Women's Declaration International por brindar este espacio seguro de mujeres para mujeres con el propósito de dialogar sobre las incoherencias e injusticias hacia las mujeres por parte de los gobiernos y organizaciones que prometen protegerlas. La Oficina de la Procuradora de las Mujeres es la oficina gubernamental dedicada a impactar las políticas públicas y los programas dirigidos a proteger los derechos de las mujeres. Fue creada por la primera gobernadora de Puerto Rico, Sila María Calderón, e introduce la perspectiva de género como perspectiva para combatir los problemas de violencia doméstica en el país. Según algunos políticos en Puerto Rico, el feminismo radical es quien ha desarrollado posturas ideológicas acerca de la perspectiva de género. Lamentablemente, el feminismo radical tiene mala reputación ante la legislatura de Puerto Rico por causa de las organizaciones feministas del país promover la ideología de género con posturas de la teoría queer. Puerto Rico es una isla grandemente conservadora y religiosa. No tiene perspectiva feminista que proteja los derechos basados en sexo de las mujeres. La gran mayoría de organizaciones que se llaman feministas apoyan la agenda transhumanista. Apoyan, defienden y dan plataforma a hombres que se identifican como mujeres. También promueven la idea de inyectar hormonas a menores y desisten de apoyar a las mujeres que no promueven la ideología queer. Actualmente, las recientes defensoras de la Oficina de la Procuradora de las Mujeres tienen otra agenda en mente, que al parecer no incluye defender los derechos de las mujeres. Aquí, algunas de las expresiones hechas por activistas de los derechos de las mujeres en Puerto Rico sobre la Oficina de la Procuradora de la Mujer y su función. Si la oficina continúa trabajando como hasta ahora, en los últimos 10 años, no tiene razón de ser en términos de la política pública para lograr la equidad. Se ha convertido más en una oficina ejecutiva que da servicios en lugar de promover la política pública sobre la equidad. Queríamos separarla del proceso político, electoral y partidista, y por eso pusimos que el gobernador, al nombrar, consultara con los grupos de las mujeres. La procuradora tiene que levantar pasiones porque tiene que asumir una férrea defensa de las mujeres en Puerto Rico. Lamentablemente, quieren que sea ocupado por una persona que no crea en los derechos de las mujeres. La colectiva también se distanció en declaraciones oficiales de Rivera Sierra, la nominada a la oficina, por entender que hubo una falta de postura clara y contundente en defensa de las personas trans y no binarias, a quienes también se debe la OPM, durante las vistas públicas para la confirmación de su nombramiento. Hacen claro que los objetivos de la oficina han cambiado. Ya no vela por la seguridad de las mujeres ante situaciones de violencia, sino que tiene una agenda de inclusión y defensa de personas que se identifican con el otro sexo y no binarias, a quienes la oficina también le debe. En ninguna parte de la ley se habla sobre los derechos de los hombres a infiltrar los espacios de mujeres. Tampoco apoya la posición ideológica de la negación sobre nuestros cuerpos sexuados. En todo caso, la Ley 20 aboga por proteger los derechos humanos de las mujeres basados en sexo para el logro de la igualdad, desarrollo pleno y la paz, dado que habían reconocido que las mujeres en Puerto Rico estaban siendo discriminadas por razones de sexo. El reconocimiento de la discriminación hacia las mujeres puertorriqueñas ha logrado el desarrollo de diversas leyes que velan por la seguridad de las mujeres en el empleo, el hogar, la escuela y otras instituciones. Sin embargo, todo el auge con la ideología de género y la continua discriminación hacia las mujeres ha obligado a mujeres profesionales en el área de derechos de las mujeres a doblegarse ante una ideología que no les sirve a las mujeres del país. Lo que admitió y lo que no pudo contestar la procuradora. Un reciente ejemplo fue la nominación de Vilmary Rivera Sierra ante la posición de Procuradora de las Mujeres. Rivera Sierra tiene una carrera de 20 años ayudando a sobrevivientes de violencia doméstica y parece ser muy capaz para manejar la oficina. Sin embargo, la profesional nominada por el gobernador Pedro Pierluisi exigió que se retirara su nominación por el proceso violento de cuestionamiento, además de no haber recibido todos los votos del Senado para asumir el cargo. Rivera Sierra se mostró incapaz de responder a las siguientes preguntas en marzo 2023. ¿Un hombre que se sienta mujer debe ser reconocido oficialmente por el Estado como mujer? Si un violador de mujeres dice que se siente mujer, ¿debe ir a la cárcel de mujeres? No pudo contestar categóricamente sí o no, respondió. Los hombres que se sientan mujeres deben poder competir en las categorías deportivas femeninas. No puedo contestar categóricamente sí o no, respondió. Para usted, ¿puede existir una persona embarazada que no sea mujer? Ella contesta, ¿puede existir una persona embarazada que no sea mujer? ¿Cómo quién? Puede haber una persona que se identifique con un género distinto, pero que sea mujer. Puede haber una mujer que se identifique como hombre, pero sea biológicamente con todos sus órganos. Esa persona, para usted, ¿es mujer o es hombre? A lo que contesta, lo define la persona, no lo defino yo. Como procuradora, ¿defenderá el derecho de las mujeres madres sobre la educación de sus hijos si en un futuro el gobierno vuelve a intentar imponer un currículo de perspectiva de género? Ella contesta, este enfoque educativo lo debe definir el Departamento de Educación. Le preguntan, ¿Defiende el derecho de las mujeres a decidir sobre la educación de sus hijos? No pudo contestar. ¿Considera el aborto un derecho humano? El aborto es un derecho que tiene la mujer, respondió. La senadora Joan Rodríguez Bebe hace preguntas directamente dirigidas a los derechos de las mujeres y las madres, en las que la profesional no pudo contestar de manera satisfactoria. Mostró que su perspectiva hacia la protección de los derechos de las mujeres es acorde con la ideología de género, o queer, que promueve la disociación hacia nuestros cuerpos sexuados, la desaparición de los espacios separados por sexo e infringe sobre los derechos parentales en torno a la educación sexual de los menores. No se atreve a dar cara públicamente ante la defensa de los derechos de las mujeres a vivir una vida plena y digna sin violencia machista o transmachista. Al no poder contestar si protegerá los espacios separados por sexo, como las cárceles y el deporte, arriesgando los mismos espacios seguros que ella dice defender, como los refugios y hogares para sobrevivientes de violencia doméstica. Luego de hacerse pública la vista ante el Senado, las organizaciones feministas responden: evita posicionarse en temas claves. Cito: Rivera Sierra evitó responder categóricamente a preguntas de la senadora Joan Rodríguez Bebe, matizadas por la presunción transfóbica de que las mujeres trans no son mujeres. A las pobres contestaciones que Rivera Sierra brindó, todas responde. La negativa de Rivera Sierra a posicionarse en dos asuntos que son bandera de una parte importante del feminismo en Puerto Rico, el reconocimiento de las identidades trans y sus derechos y la defensa del derecho al aborto como un derecho humano, generó críticas de parte de otras feministas y de la colectiva feminista en construcción. Dan a entender que no importa que Rivera Sierra haya ayudado a mujeres sobrevivientes de violencia doméstica por 20 años, si la procuradora no admite de manera abierta que cree en las identidades trans, no es apoyada por el movimiento feminista del país. En adición, la senadora Migdalia González le pidió que definiera lo que es la perspectiva de género, a lo que Rivera Sierra contesta: la perspectiva de género es un método para poder analizar las desigualdades que existen entre hombres y mujeres. Es la única forma que desde las organizaciones de las Naciones Unidas incluso recomiendan que los países establezcan para poder hacer un análisis profundo de las desigualdades que existen entre hombres y mujeres. Como muchos ya sabemos, las Naciones Unidas ha decidido adoptar un lenguaje ideológico al referirse a madres y mujeres, además de que la perspectiva de género tiene diversas interpretaciones e influencias de la teoría queer. Las feministas que están al tanto de los conflictos que presenta la ideología de género han optado por el uso de teorías multidisciplinarias que ayudan a explicar la situación actual de las mujeres y los menores afectados por la ideología. En otra entrevista con Todas PR, antes de ser cuestionada por el Senado, las respuestas que brinda sobre qué mujeres son incluidas en la oficina se mantiene ambigua porque sabe que no puede ser sincera y decir que solo incluye y protege a mujeres hembras. La ley no incluye a hombres que se identifican como mujeres, aunque al ser una oficina que recibe fondos de la ley VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, no puede negar servicios a los hombres, lo que, según la senadora Rodríguez Bebe, la oficina pierde su objetivo de ser una oficina que atiende solo las situaciones de las mujeres. En cuanto a la educación de perspectiva de género, prácticamente se lava las manos diciendo que es responsabilidad del Departamento de Educación. Sin embargo, La creación de currículos o escuelas que promueven la coeducación en el país, Ley 62, conlleva la colaboración con la Oficina de la Procuradora de las Mujeres para su desarrollo, según lo establece la ley. Así que no estaría fuera de la norma que la ley que implementa el currículo con perspectiva de género también pida apoyo o guía de la Oficina de la Procuradora de las Mujeres, por lo que la Procuradora debe tener una postura clara sobre la educación sexual de nuestros menores. Según la respuesta de la Procuradora de las Mujeres sobre qué es la perspectiva de género y quiénes son los responsables de implementarla y desarrollarla, menciona el Comité PARE. La representante Lizy Burgos del partido Proyecto Dignidad ha recopilado en su página web unas imágenes sobre lo que el Comité PARE considera perspectiva de género, las contradicciones de sus promotores y las lecciones utilizadas. Es claro que lo que desean enseñar es ideología queer a temprana edad. El respeto y la dignidad humana no se educa de esta manera. Hay varias otras herramientas para educar en la afectividad y el respeto sin utilizar lecciones ideológicas que al final confunden a los menores y los introduce a ideas como el uso de hormonas del otro sexo para encajar en unos estereotipos y que la validación de nuestra autoestima depende de la validación de otro sobre nosotros mismos. La ley establece que los padres o tutores de los menores tienen derecho a seleccionar cómo educar a sus hijos respecto a la sexualidad y afectividad, por lo que una procuradora de la mujer tiene que proteger el derecho de las madres a decidir sobre la educación sexual de sus hijos. Es claro que el proyecto Dignidad entiende lo que la educación con perspectiva de género desea hacer con nuestros menores: construir un lenguaje que perpetúa e impone un sistema de pensamientos ideológicos por encima del que los padres hayan escogido para su crianza. En Puerto Rico, el único partido político abogando por la seguridad de los menores y los derechos parentales sobre la educación es el partido Proyecto Dignidad, el cual establece que no creen en la imposición de temas sexuales complejos y confusos, filosofías promovidas por la teoría queer, lamentablemente atribuidos a las feministas radicales. Senadoras proponen eliminar la imposición de perspectiva de género en ley de procuradora de las mujeres. A raíz de lo sucedido en abril 2023, la antes mencionada senadora Joan Rodríguez Bebe y la senadora Marialí González Huertas del Partido Popular Democrático presentan un proyecto para enmendar la Ley 20 del 2001, la cual crea la Oficina de la Procuradora de las Mujeres. Según las senadoras, la Ley 20 del 2001 establece parámetros limitantes y excluyentes para la selección de la Procuradora de las Mujeres, al imponer el análisis con perspectiva de género como el único abordaje para dirigir los trabajos de la persona nombrada al puesto de Procuradora de las Mujeres. Esto limita la investigación de diversas causas de los problemas de las mujeres y excluye de manera injustificada el universo de mujeres que pueden ser consideradas para dicho cargo. De acuerdo a Rodríguez Bebe, el objetivo de las enmiendas a la ley es liberar a la oficina del secuestro ideológico en el que se encuentra, de manera que abra puertas a todas las mujeres capacitadas para ejercer el cargo de procuradora a ser consideradas en igualdad de condiciones, brindando una oportunidad de inclusión en el proceso de selección, desde el cual se evalúe a todas las mujeres que a través de la dirección de esa oficina desean aportar sus conocimientos. Los artículos propuestos a enmendar son el artículo 2, artículo 4 y la derogación de los artículos 6, 7 y 8 de la Ley 20. El artículo 2 se eliminaría la definición del Consejo Consultativo de la Oficina de la Procuradora de la Mujer, la cual lleva inoperante por los gobernadores de la última década. Artículo 4 eliminaría como criterio el análisis con perspectiva de género, ya que el modelo de perspectiva de género, conocida en el mundo como ideología de género, no atiende las necesidades de las mujeres. Deroga los artículos 6, 7 y 8 de la ley, las cuales liberan a la oficina de cumplir con requerir una oficina que lleva inoperante por varios años, además de librar la destinación de más fondos para actividades que no representan un servicio, que no representan una prestación de servicios directos. El Consejo Consultativo le quita responsabilidad a la oficina de la Procuradora para investigar interdisciplinariamente las problemáticas de las mujeres en Puerto Rico, limitando la toma de decisiones a unas 5 personas sobre las soluciones de los problemas de las mujeres. Si existe un consejo consultativo, ¿cuál es la necesidad de una procuradora de las mujeres si estas 7 personas son las que estarían investigando y asesorando, por encima de dialogar con las diversas organizaciones feministas del país? El artículo 8 del Consejo Consultativo, la eliminación de dietas establecida para los miembros de la Asamblea Legislativa de Puerto Rico, por cada reunión a que asistan o por cada día en que realicen cualquier enmienda relacionada de su presidenta, relacionada con las funciones que esta ley asigna al Consejo Consultativo. Tienen derecho al reembolso de gastos en que incurran en el desempeño de sus funciones oficiales. La derogación eliminaría estas cláusulas. Por el momento, el único partido velando por la dignidad y los derechos de las mujeres en Puerto Rico, referentes a protegerlas de la ideología de género y la infiltración de varones en sus espacios, es el Partido Conservador del país, los cuales proponen medidas racionales e interdisciplinarias para comprender las problemáticas de las mujeres del país. La representante Lizy Burgos desarrolló el proyecto 1740, donde manifiesta su compromiso de estar firme en la defensa de la dignidad de la mujer, para que puedan estar seguras y sin presencia de un hombre al momento de acudir a un servicio sanitario. El proyecto reconoce que la ideología de género ha afectado directamente a las mujeres y nuestra privacidad de manera global. La medida pretende prohibir el uso de baños inclusivos, ya que han causado un impacto negativo en la vida de muchas mujeres a manos de hombres que se aprovechan de la ideología de género para planificar y hacer daño. Su objetivo con la medida es proteger la vida y la privacidad de nuestras mujeres y niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes. En adición, la representante sostiene que es necesario adelantarse a los tiempos para prevenir en Puerto Rico situaciones lamentables que ya han ocurrido internacionalmente. Por tal razón, radica también el proyecto 1741 para crear la ley para la protección y seguridad de la mujer en las instituciones penales, con objetivos de establecer de manera clara que las instituciones penales para mujeres son exclusivamente para mujeres biológicas, reconociendo que es necesario utilizar este término ante la idea de que un hombre puede autopercibirse como mujer. Recalca que no puede apoyar de ninguna manera que un hombre que cometa un acto delictivo termine en una celda con una mujer, le haga daño y propague un sistema penitenciario caótico, riesgoso, cruel y desacostumbrado, prohibido por la Constitución. Para que la Oficina de la Procuradora de las Mujeres tenga futuro en Puerto Rico, es necesario que las mujeres estemos unidas en la legislatura. Concuerdo con la representante Burgos, no podemos permitir que la retórica gire en torno a que se tiene que proteger a la mujer y obrar de manera contraria. No es cuestión de ignorancia a este punto, ya que los medios de comunicación propagan por doquier que las mujeres se sienten inseguras, y este es un paso en la dirección correcta que nos permitirá lugares más seguros para todas. Concluye también que esta defensa a la mujer no es un capricho partidista, sino es legislar preventivamente ante las lamentables vivencias de mujeres alrededor del mundo. Gracias por su atención. Thank you so much.
Denise is going to speak, and she's a very fast runner, so she'll be, I'm sure she won't take Denise is a runner, and she is coordinator of North Yorkshire Women's Rights Network and a member of Sports Special Interest Group, and she does Park Run, which is a 5-kilometre run, amongst other things that she does, and is going to talk to us about Park Run's capitulation to gender identity ideology. So thank you for waiting, Denise. And over to you.
So Park Run is a mass participation, global, free 5-kilometre running event held in parks and other open spaces. And I'm sure many of you know that already. There are over 1,100 park runs in the United Kingdom alone, and they are undoubtedly a brilliant way of encouraging people to get active. So I'm talking specifically about Park Run UK's policy, but the international policy looks to be the same. Park Run is not a race. However, it does have all the trappings of competitive sport. By means of a wristband barcode, times are recorded, course records are kept, the fastest 500 each course is listed, personal bests are sought, and something called age grading scores are calculated. The sex, or gender as Park Run calls it, is crucial to this percentage score. So, although it's not a race per se, it most certainly offers the competitive among us the opportunity to compare our achievements, or otherwise, with others in the same sex and age category, or so you would hope. Disappointingly, at the point of registration, Park Run fails to record sex favouring gender, of course, and asks male, female, other gender identity, and prefer not to say. Elsewhere in gender guidance, you are told that the gender marker can be subsequently changed. And furthermore, Park Run says, should an existing park runner change their gender identity on their Park Run profile, their results history will remain unchanged. Their history remains unchanged. However, going forward, results will be presented as per their current gender. Should that person wish to backdate their change in gender in total or from a specific date, they can do so by contacting us via our support page, and the historical results will be updated accordingly. Good grief. So they provide a support page for any man to update his results to make them a woman's results. Okay. I was oblivious to this until I received the weekly Park Run email about a year ago. It was headed with a blog called Living as Myself, which was prefaced with Park Run is committed to ensuring our events are as accessible and possible to as many people as possible, which includes breaking down barriers to signing up. As a result, and following a lengthy international consultation, we evolved the gender question on our registration form in 2020 to include another gender identity. And there then followed a piece of propaganda by a man called Ada Macy. There is at least one other Park Run blog piece by a man called, calling himself Kate Hodges, and that's called Where I Know I'm Always Welcome, and Lord's Park Run's inclusive environment. And of course he does. As far as I can ascertain, Hodges runs as a woman. I'm unsure about Macy. When the Women's Rights Network Sports Group was planning its Summer of Sports campaign, it seemed a good time to try to address this nonsense with Park Run. And we tweeted, we agree with Mara Yamuchi that fairness in sport for women matters all levels, not just elite. Therefore, all women and girls should expect fair sex-based categories. It is disappointing that the otherwise excellent free mass participation event at Parkrun considers it inclusive to allow men to change their gender marker to female. So at Parkrun, you record and publish the results of men who identify as female as if they were actually female. How is this fair to the women participating? Maria Mucci, she's a former Olympic marathon runner, by the way. She got in touch with a stark illustration of how this policy of so-called inclusion leads to injustice and unfairness towards women. She linked to Parkrun results in relation to a trans-identifying man called Sean, previously Simon, Longthorpe. Longthorpe has held the female course record at Park, that's right, it's Parkrun, since July 2019, despite being male. Longthorpe, then calling himself Simon, is also the fifth overall male at Parkrun. That shows you how good he is. And that was from August 2015. Longthorpe, as Sean, is placed 116th overall in the Parkrun statistics. That is, there are 115 runners faster than Longthorpe, all of them men, obviously including him. The women who hold the second and third places behind him are extremely good runners, but there is little prospect of his record being broken, except maybe by elite female athletes. And then Longthorpe is also the holder of the female record in the age-graded percentage score at Torbay Fellow Parkrun, and he's second overall. That is, there's just one man placed above him. Longthorpe then ran at Porthcawl Parkrun just a couple of weeks ago, 20th of May this year, and he smashed the women's record. The real holder of the Porthcawl Parkrun women's record is called Deb Roberts. She's a bit of a local legend in terms of her running, and she understandably feels a bit cheated. There was a piece in the Daily Mail, although it's not clear if she will make a complaint to Parkrun. So we, as the sports group, WRN Sports Group, wrote to Parkrun, setting out in detail our concerns about their policy of self-ID and its appalling unfairness to women. They replied, failing to address any of the issues we raised. The cloak of inclusivity was well and truly invoked. Their reply, in 2019, after careful consideration, we decided to continue categorizing people based on gender rather than assigned sex. We feel this is in line with our ethos of non-competitive, oh, this is lovely. This is in line with our ethos of non-competitive, socially focused physical activity and allows people to identify in the way they feel most appropriate and comfortable. At Parkrun, we aim to be as inclusive and welcoming as possible. We believe that our current solution is the most appropriate available at this time. Further examples of how Parkrun are corrupting data because of their ideological capture have come to light. In particular, something called age-graded percentage scores. Parkrunners will understand that. It's a bit difficult to get your head around, but they aggregate scores related to your gender and your age. Anyway, a particular trans-identifying man currently scores an absolutely astonishing 90.73%, which places him in the world-class range. His actual score, obviously because he's a man, is 70, which is decent, but nothing to write home about. Since then, I discovered that for 11 years, Aberystwyth Women's Parkrun course record has been held by a man who calls himself Lauren Jeska. Jeska was convicted of attempted murder for a horrific knife attack on a UK athletics official. He was jailed for 18 years in 2017. He tried to murder Ralph Nibbs, the UK athletics employee, who needed to talk to Jeska about his eligibility in the female category in fell racing. Jessica had failed to produce blood samples when requested. And yes, of course, he should not have been in the female category, whatever his testosterone levels were. But in short, Jessica thought it was entirely proportionate to attempt to skewer, according to one witness, poor Mr. Nibbs, who suffered life-changing injuries. WRN, Women's Rights Network founder, Heather Binning, was interviewed in the Telegraph, prompting their headline, "Park Run Women's Record Held by Transgender Attempted Murderer." Following the revelation of this astonishing information, she said it was gobsmacking that Jessica was in prison for the attempted murder of someone from UK Athletics who was questioning how eligible the runner was, adding that Jessica is in a women's prison despite politicians' mealy-mouthed words that violent male offenders should not be in the female estate. Yes, you heard that correctly. He is being held in a woman's prison. Last Saturday, we tweeted an open letter from the Women's Rights Network to Parkrun, outlining the problem and providing them with a solution. In brief, record by sex, issue a statement that people are expected to participate in the correct sex category, and delete any records held by men in the female category. We've also sent a detailed technical letter in response to their woeful reply to our first letter. And we do so hoping for, but not expecting, a better reply. Since we started our campaign 6 weeks ago, there has been quite a lot of media interest. So, despite studiously ignoring us, the Parkrun CEO, Russ Jefferies, and the board of directors must be aware of the furore at their capture by a misogynistic cult. If you're a park runner, I'd encourage you to email and write, hard copy if you can, to Parkrun UK. I was going to say I'll put the email and address in the chat. I'm not sure I can because I'm on my phone and yes, I'm not sure I'll manage to do that. But park runners in other countries can also be fairly certain this nonsense applies, but you need to check and then challenge for sure. And you might also want to protest quietly and politely at your local park run. In either instance, please don't give local volunteers a hard time. It's not their fault. Contact the CEO and the directors and tell them what you think. There were, in fact, at least 2 protests at Parkrun in the UK today, one at Porthcawl and one at Bushy Park. I will, I don't know if it's worth me reading out the address in case somebody could put it into the chat. I'll read it out slowly. So send a hard copy to the CEO, Russ Jefferies, Jefferies, Parkrun UK, Frameworks, 2 Sheen, Sheen Road, Richmond, Surrey, TW9 1AE, or email support@parkrun.com. So that's a way of contacting them. You may also, if you would like to contact us, the special interest group, we are, it's all lowercase, sports@womensrights.network, or the central WRN account is admin@womensrights.network. And I'm just showing you my lovely Parkrun t-shirt and lovely Parkrun mug.